And it's 21 minutes after the hour of 6 o'clock. Welcome back to all of you. If you're just joining, if you've been with us and if you're just joining us, thank you so much. It's the No Morning Show here on TTT. I am Natalie Lagore. And in today's Spotlight, Dr. Nicole Ramlachlan to speak to us about this Delta variant. We've been hearing of the horror stories across the world. Florida becoming the epicenter of the COVID-19 spread in the United States of America with the Delta variant there. Will Trinidad and Tobago end up that way, or with all these vaccines, will they protect us against the Delta variant? Good morning to you, Dr. Ramlachlan.
Morning, good morning, viewers.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, Doc, we're hearing of cases here in Trinidad and Tobago, but so far we're not sure if there's any community spread. What will happen if this Delta variant gets into the community?
Well, what we know is what we've seen from other countries, right? It's much more highly transmissible than the original strain, and of most of the variants that have developed since. Because what has happened is that the spike protein that sticks out on the surface of the virus, like this, which attaches itself to the receptors of the lung cells and so on, where infection occurs, has mutated, so it's much better at doing that. So it's actually much easier for it to hook on to. It's almost like a lock and key hook mechanism, right? It's almost like if it's a grappling hook, and that's how it gets into our actual cells to cause problems, and takes our cells and uses it to harness it to be able to produce only viral proteins. So now our cells no longer become interested in working for our bodies and actually are working for the virus, so to speak. And that's how infection occurs. When these mutations occur, and it becomes no longer a variant of interest, it becomes a variant of concern, or worse yet, if we ever get any in the world, we don't have any yet right now, a variant of high consequence, which is totally really, really highly transmissible and able to evade immunity, then we're going to have problems. So that's really the situation. So it's in about 120 countries now, the Delta variant. And once it enters and it gets into the level of community spread, it usually takes over pretty fast. So in the case of India, we saw what happened back in April and May when it appeared in India, because it was a variant that was homegrown in India because of the large numbers of unvaccinated people. Acting as mutation incubators. That's really what it is, viral incubators, if you're unvaccinated in the numbers of millions, which is what was occurring in India at the time.
But, you know, Dr. Ramlachlan, if we have some of these vaccines that are built with the spike, with your body, you know, needing to mount a response to the spike protein, and you're saying to us that the spike protein has mutated. How effective will these vaccines be against the Delta variant?
Well, lucky enough we've been able to test it, right? And we actually knew from the UK studies and from some of the other studies that the variants are actually able to be controlled by the antibodies produced from the vaccine. So the UK study, in the case of Pfizer, it's almost 92%. In the case of, 98%. In the case of AstraZeneca, it's about 92% against the Delta variant. In the Indonesian study that came out a few weeks ago, it's upwards of 60-something% to 80-something% with the Sinopharm, depending on the demographic and so on that was checked. So we know it's effective. We know that, most importantly, the neutralizing antibodies, which are produced from vaccination, are actually effective against the Delta variant in particular. Before that, they were able to look at it on the Gamma variant, which had come out of Brazil, that we used to call the P1 variant. Before that, they looked at it on the Beta variant, which was the Kent variant from the UK, and also the South African variant, which was the Alpha variant. So we know it's effective. In particular, the Delta variant has been able to be effectively neutralized post-vaccination. The problem is the transmissibility is so much higher. So that is why we're saying that this has become more of a pandemic of the unvaccinated right now, because in all the countries where we're seeing the big outbreaks, in the United States, some states have 98%, 99% of the cases in hospitals are unvaccinated, with the rest of it being people with one vaccine. Because remember, you're only partially vaccinated if you have one vaccine, right? It's when you only get the full immune response two to 3 weeks after your second vaccine, except of course in the Johnson and Johnson. So people who are partially vaccinated seem to be susceptible, but not as susceptible, of course, and not causing severe disease and death as we are seeing in the unvaccinated.
You
And that's
know,
a scene that's been repeating all
Dr.
over the world,
Ramlachan,
even in countries like Seychelles, that have reached up to 90% vaccination. We're still seeing deaths and severe disease in the unvaccinated with the Delta.
so, but I think one of the things I'm curious about is that, they keep saying that the Delta variants and even other variants are a lot, it spreads a lot quicker, a lot more, the viral load, I guess, is a lot higher. So, the cases of the coronavirus will be a lot worse in a lot of people. But I remember when we just had the coronavirus pandemic that we were told these very same things. So what's so different now?
Well, we had a very high viral load in the very beginning. You don't remember everybody dying. All those pictures in the hospitals with people in
Mm-hmm.
ICU upside down. I mean, we had them in the thousands all over the world. So, I mean, that is not it. Nobody was being misleading at the time. We had no immunity. So when a new virus, a novel virus comes into a human population of which there's never been seen anything like that before. I mean, it had similar things like the previous SARS and the other type of cold viruses, which are all coronaviruses. So there's similar in structure, but not that particular version. You're going to have a totally what we call immunonaive population. And when that occurs, you're going to see full-on severe disease and death, which is what we saw in repeated again in many, many countries all over the world. What was lucky in Trinidad and Tobago is because of the immediate lockdown, we didn't get that big surge initially because what came into Trinidad were people who were smaller numbers of people brought it in, and we didn't really have true community spread in the beginning, which was great. We had a little bit more as time went on, like around Christmas, and then of course post Easter. Every single time we get a what we call an epidemic. So an epidemic is when you have a surge in that little area, i.e., Trinidad or Tobago is what we're seeing now. With the arrival of the Delta. So, I mean, we know it causes severe disease and death. Again, because the spike protein now is able to hook on faster and be able to replicate better in
And that's what I'm
unvaccinated
saying, Dr.
people.
Ramlach. And to me, it seems as if it's almost as if we're having, COVID virus for the first time, so to speak, because it's that we had the coronavirus and we developed these vaccines and then it mutated. But you're telling us that the vaccines have been proven effective against the new strains.
Yeah, so the people who are getting it and who you're seeing in the hospital are not the fully vaccinated people. You're only seeing unvaccinated people with severe disease and death. So as I mentioned before, there are places in Louisiana, United States, all over Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Tennessee, where they have very high unvaccinated populations,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking, to the rest of the
But
country.
isn't
And
isn't
there, where
that
you're
funny?
seeing,
Isn't that
that's where you're
something though,
seeing the
Doc?
ICU. That's where you're seeing the children in particular
Mm-hmm.
are being affected. We have this talk with UTT tomorrow about children and COVID-19 and vaccination. And
Right.
unfortunately, they're the ones that are getting hit in those communities because they're the ones that are not vaccinated in the highest numbers.
We'll get to that in just a bit, Doc, because I do think it's something that we really need to speak about children and COVID. But
Mm-hmm.
isn't that something, though, that we have a virus? And it's not that you're saying to us that everybody's getting it, but only the people who are unvaccinated are dying. You're saying only the people who are unvaccinated getting this variant? How does that work?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's
Okay.
highly transmissible. So the people who are unvaccinated are spreading it, and they're the ones in which it's replicating and causing severe disease and death. So when you are vaccinated with against mumps, measles, diphtheria, chicken pox, anything, you are still going to have two things. Number one, that virus can still enter your body, right? We are not physically blocking the virus from entering your body. What we have done via vaccination, which is what we've always done since 200 years ago with the smallpox vaccine, is to introduce little particles of that virus into your body so you can mount an immune response. So the next time it comes and it tries to harness your cell machinery and take it over to replicate, your body says, no, I know what you are. You are a bad guy, and I'm going to get you, and start producing antibodies. So it can still enter your body. This is what we keep telling everybody. So we're not blocking infection. What we're blocking is number one, transmission. So you could transmit it less if you're vaccinated. Number two, replication in a vaccinated body, because the antibodies and your T cells and your B cells are there to fight because they've seen it before. So it's like if you're fighting a war and somebody pulls up with a tank you never see for the first time, you're going to probably have a lot of casualties. But the next time that person pulls up with that tank, you're going to have a bigger tank, right? That's the logic behind it. So your body is able to fight it off and control the infection. So that person who's vaccinated does not get severe disease and death unless it's a breakthrough infection, which happens in the case of like 5,350 million. So it's literally 1 in a million chances usually of having breakthrough where you're actually going to be hospitalized if you've been vaccinated. And that's been translated in the numbers we're seeing. The CMO said a few weeks ago, absolutely nobody in Trinidad who has died has been fully vaccinated, and that is still the truth. If you look at the other countries, and I mean, everybody publishes their data. There's no jokes here. There's no for cover up. There's no lies. The people in the hospital who are in the ICU, you might have 1 out of 700 or 800 that have had one vaccine, and the rest of people are unvaccinated. So that's what happens post-vaccination, is that the vaccination allows your body to, one, transmit less. It can still transmit, but you're transmitting less. Two, replicate less, the virus to replicate less. And three, most importantly, not cause severe disease and infection to the level of death in that vaccinated person. So that vaccinated person can still, if you have virus in your nose and you go sneeze, I have 2 vaccines. I've had 2 vaccines for many months now. If I have virus in my nose and I sneeze on you, you will get virus from me. It doesn't mean that
Dr.
I'm sick.
Ramlachlan, a question. If, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, one of the things we heard then is that 85% of people will not get a severe form of the disease. 10% might get it moderate and 5% might get it severe. And of that 5%, the death rate, might be 2% or even under, correct?
That in older populations, that's what we saw from the demographics.
How is that different? How are those stats different from when you're vaccinated? Because if you're talking about a 98% chance of surviving the COVID-19 pandemic, how are those stats different from if you're unvaccinated?
You mean if you're vaccinated?
Sorry, if you're vaccinated, yeah.
If you're vaccinated, the chance of you getting infected is 0.002. So it's much, much lower. And the chance of you showing disease, it's very, very low. So it's extremely low if it is you're fully vaccinated versus if you're unvaccinated, you have a much higher chance of almost 15% of showing disease. And I think now it's about almost 3%. If you are infected.
I think the reason I ask, Doc, is that there are people out there who are hesitant to take the vaccine. And I was hoping that we could present the argument to them that listen, because when we do statistics, we say plus or minus 2%, right? Give or take a margin of error of 2%. So if the chances of death is in that bracket, should we really get vaccinated?
Well, I mean, you can see the numbers, you can see the people dying around the world and see exactly. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have over 1,600 people who have lost their lives. So it comes down to that. It comes down to the fact that our children are unvaccinated. People who are immunocompromised and elderly are unvaccinated and probably will never be. People who are allergic cannot take the vaccine. And we are counting on the population to actually be able to protect those individuals, in addition to, of course, to protect ourselves. So vaccination has helped. I mean, we've eradicated smallpox with vaccination. We have eliminated polio, diphtheria, pertussis, all of these vaccine treatable diseases using vaccination. We have vaccinated our children from as early as 3 months using 6-valent vaccines, where there's 6 combinations of the different viruses in one vaccine. And they've been very effectively at controlling epidemics, controlling death and disease. So, I mean, this is not something that is unusual to the human population. We have already vaccinated over 4.6 billion people with COVID-19 vaccines in the world. We have 22% of, I think today it's roughly about 22, a little bit higher percent of our population right now in Trinidad and Tobago that's been vaccinated, fully vaccinated. We need to get those numbers into the 70s, 80% in order to be able to have a chance of controlling this at the community level and bringing it down and bringing down our numbers. And as you know, we've now started vaccinating or encouraging vaccination on our 12 to 17-year-olds. Our 0 to 12-year-olds are unprotected. And we have to be very considerate of that and understand that you can't bring that disease home as an unvaccinated individual, as an unmasked individual, and spread it amongst your family and people who aren't able to take the vaccine right now. We have to understand that.
Dr. Ramlachan, you would know better than I do, but in terms of like the 1920 pandemic, the Spanish flu, is it correct that the people who got vaccinated are the people who died?
1918
Not
Spanish flu
1920. This is it 1920 the Spanish flu?
1918 it started. 1918 the Spanish flu started. It ended in 1920 due to vaccination. That's how it ended. So that is completely false. The people who died, over 15 million people in the world or whatever were infected, and we had a lot of deaths, were people who were unvaccinated. So vaccination, I mean, you can look at it. I don't know where people are getting their statistics from. I keep on telling them, look at peer-reviewed sources, look at proper sources that are scientific in nature. You can see what happened when vaccines came into the world for all vaccine treatable diseases, including influenza. The previous SARS we had in 2000s, even Ebola, we were able to effectively use mRNA-based vaccines in Ebola outbreak in Africa, 2016, 2017, 2018.
Dr. Ramlachan, I know you all are having a webinar tomorrow to talk about the well-being of children, and between who are vaccinated, or let me rephrase that, how vaccines can affect the well-being of children. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. We have several of our experts that we've actually been able to convince to come onto this panel to be able to share their expertise and help us. Ms. Vandana Sankar, Dr. Michelle Montai, Dr. Vidya Ramcharita Miraj, and myself and Dr. Hazel DePisa from UTT. And we're all going to speak at different aspects of how this first of all, we want to establish how the pandemic has affected children. We know they've been at home for a very extended period of time. Some of them have been nutritionally deficit because they count on the school feeding program and so on for a lot of their nutritional basis around during the day. A lot of them don't have technology to be able to log in, so some of them are actually away from the school learning environment. Sometimes they're in homes that and exposed to areas that are not up, the best for them. We're talking about that and speaking to that, but we're also speaking, why is it different? Why is it different for children? Why do we have to do different clinical trials for children for these vaccines? Why are their immunogenicity different? Why does the virus progress in a child? Initially, we were talking about MIS-C, multi-inflammatory syndrome in children. We weren't talking about COVID-19 infection. Now we're actually talking about COVID-19 infection. Why is it changed? How does vaccination help? These people who are reluctant to get their children vaccine to get them back to school, how can we convince them that, this is a good idea? How any states, I think, or in certain areas, they've done very well at vaccinating their 12 and over. In some cases, 69%, 59% of their 12 to 18, 12 and over population has been vaccinated, which is very well, which was what was expected and very well done. So we want to get into those numbers to be able to get our children into a safety zone where we can put them back in.
And where can people watch this, be a part of discussion? How can they access the panel discussion?
So you can look at it up on the UTT YouTube channel. The website address, I think, is u.tt.edu /COVID-19 research. Or you could type in any of those words on YouTube and it will come up, and look at the UTT website as well too. There are certain accused heading you to that direction. And this is I did 10 standalone series, a 10 series standalone on the different aspects of infection and efficacy and all those things. And the last 4 or 5 have been these panel discussions. And we've been very, very lucky to have the expertise that we have in Trinidad and Tobago that can actually give us the real story. These are people who on ground,
Right.
who
Dr.
are seeing
Ramlachan,
the
we are going to have to leave it there, but tomorrow,
Sure.
6 p.m. for this panel discussion.
And thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome, Dr. Nicole Ramlachan there. Geneticist is talking to us about the Delta variant, and she's saying some of these vaccines have been proven, different efficacy levels, but have been proven effective against the Delta variant, so go and get vaccinated. All right, so watch a panel discussion tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Just type in UTT, do a search, and you'll find it. All right, we take a break and we'll be back with you.
What brings us